This happened to my friend, who was working as a police officer at the time. We should call my friend Tom. Anyways, Tom had just begun working as an officer, and as a result, he got stuck with lousy shifts. Tom worked in a neighborhood where just about nothing bad ever happened, but working graveyard shifts at parks in the area can still be pretty creepy. Usually, he would just find a couple stoners hanging out on a swing set. This one night, Tom had a shift at a local park he didn't often go to. It's about 2 a.m. and his only job is to make sure no one is around and all is well. As he's walking around the outskirts of the woods, he sees one man just standing with his back facing towards him, on the edge of the darkness of the woods. He yelled to the man, "Hey you, what are you doing? Come on over here right now." The man turned and smiled at him. Then he dashed into the woods. Without really thinking, Tom sprinted after him. The guy was booking it, leaping over bushes and ducking under fallen trees like a pro. Tom is an extremely athletic guy, but this man was on a different level. As Tom finally catches the guy, he again yells to him. The man smiles once again, then books it once again. Tom kept after him, but was a good ways away from him, about 10 to 15 feet behind. This guy finally reached the clearing in the woods. Tom's adrenaline running low, and is taking all his power to keep screaming for the guy to stop. The guy turns and smiles once more. The guy books it over the hill, seemingly to a steep slower this time. Tom draws his gun and powers up the hill. The guy was gone. According to Tom, he just literally disappeared. There was no way he could have escaped normally. To this day, Tom recounts as an encounter with something very sinister. The only thing he could find in the woods was a makeshift, run-down campsite that looked like it hadn't been inhabited in years. I'm a guy, and about 11 years ago when I was 8 years old, me and my family, my mom, dad, brother, and as well as my brother's girlfriend, who was living with us at the time, went on holiday to Australia to visit some relatives on my mom's side of the family. They lived in the rural parts of Victoria, and to give a basic summary of the area, they lived on a farm. The house was surrounded by various fields. When facing the house on the left side, there were 2 fields, and then on the far end of these fields there were highly wooded areas with a dirt track running through it. My grandparents, the relatives that lived there, would often go nature rambles through this forested spot and the wildlife that lived within there. My mother, being a dedicated bird spotter, decides to head off with me and Lisa, my brother's girlfriend, into the forest as we both had a fascination with wildlife. We must have been walking along the dirt track for around 10 minutes, taking pictures of the various animals we'd seen. We passed by a line of motorbikes and around 7 bikers having a barbecue. One of the bikers politely smiled at my mother, and she responded with a simple, "Good evening." As we walked past them, one of the bikers approached us and asked us where we were going. We told them, then they informed us that they had been camping in this area for around 2 nights now. They told us to be careful as people had been shooting game in the forest. These people apparently had aggressive dogs, so we were told to be careful. Around 15 minutes later, I spotted an old barn which I dashed off to explore, being the adventurous child I was, while my mother and Lisa observed a bird of some kind. I didn't tell them where I was going. As I approached the barn, I saw 3 large dogs tied up outside. They were Rottweilers and they seemed incredibly aggressive. They were on chains and barking and snarling a lot. I didn't think anything of it at the time. I assumed they were for hunting. But looking back, Rottweilers aren't very good for hunting. There was also an old mattress on the floor outside, which appeared to be covered in brown stains and emanated a foul aroma. I was around 3 feet away from the mattress, but the smell was unbelievably powerful. As I was going to turn around and return to the others, I saw a man emerging from the barn. The image of this man is one of the few things I remember clearly from this day. He was very tall, about 6'4", and was wearing a blue pinstripe suit. The strangest thing about him was that he was wearing a large top hat. His clothes seemed very worn, and his face, the parts of it that weren't covered by a large brow beard, were red, as if he had just been working out on a hot day. I remember the man smiled and approached me. I asked him if he was a magician, which he said no. I look after doggies. Do you like doggies? I told him I did. This is when it started to get weird. He began to approach me and ask if I wanted to come inside and have my picture taken with the dogs. I politely refused and said my mom would be looking for me. He grabbed my hand lightly and said it would only take a second. At that point, I heard my mom shouting to the man, demanding to know what he was doing. She had come looking for me. The man simply let go and just stared at her. She asked him again, in which he continued just to blankly stare. He didn't say a word. My mom immediately grabbed my arm, and me and her, Elisa, walked away as quickly as possible back to the entrance. We got about halfway there when I turned around and told my mother that the magician was following us. She turned around, and sure enough, he was power walking behind us. My mom screamed at him and asked what he wanted. He didn't reply again, simply continued power walking toward us. At that point, my mom began walking even faster to the point that she was dragging me along. The next part of the story is mostly a blur to me. I remember my mom gasping, picking me up and sprinting full pelt with me while screaming for help. My mom tells me that the man had begun running toward us and managed to grab my leg. She said that Lisa jumped on the man's back and scratched all across his face before he threw her on the floor. My mom apparently kicked the man in the testicles, grabbed Lisa off the ground and ran with me over her shoulder. I remember we slowed down shortly afterwards and stopped to catch our breath. We continued walking over for the magician to show up again, but we didn't see him pop out anymore. My mom began to panic and started running with me again. All of a sudden, this man sprints out of the bushes again after us. We were nearing the area where the bikers were camping, and my mom screamed for help. 2 bikers emerged from the tree nearby. My mom screamed, "That man tried to kidnap my son." The magician turned around and immediately bolted in the other direction. One of the bikers pursues him, but unfortunately, the magician had a head start. I remember the bikers were incredibly nice, and I soon forgot about the strange man after one of the bikers let me sit in one of his motorbikes, while my mom and Lisa went inside the car. The guy took us to the nearest town and dropped us off at the police station where my mom filed a report. After that, he gave us all a lift back, so he was really nice and we really appreciated that. I never got to thank him at the time as I didn't really understand the situation. When I was living in Australia for a year, I was once in a passenger carrier, traveling through towns to get to the next destination I was heading to. We were passing through rural towns in New South Wales that are all small but are still well populated. We passed by a field, and in this park where families are having picnics and enjoying the day, kids are running around, playing, etc. While I'm looking at the park and all the people in it, with my head on the window, I all of a sudden see what looks like a gray zombie walking through the park. It's walking right by families and people sitting down, but no one seems to take notice of this thing. It's sticking out like a sore thumb. No one is looking up, and I assume the freak is in a Halloween costume when it's not Halloween or something. It is moving slow and limping like a zombie would, but has a dead look in its eyes and its skin is gray. If my memory serves me correctly, even its clothes are gray. It's wearing tattered clothes and has a Frankenstein monster kind of air about it. That's the best way I can describe it, like a gray zombie Frankenstein monster. My eyes follow him the entire time while my bus passes the park, which is only for a moment. But the thing that freaks me out the most is how it's passing by all these families and no one is paying any attention to it. Thing is, it didn't necessarily seem evil to me, just incredibly sad. It didn't make eye contact with me. It was just walking slowly and sadly, and didn't necessarily seem to have a purpose. The huge gray guy is dressed up as Frankenstein's monsters painted gray on a sunny day, and no one is taking notice of him, even when he walks right in front of them. I don't know what to make of it. A very short 10-second psychosis on my part, or something supernatural. This encounter takes place several years ago in a remote part of the Australian outback. For a bit of background, I'm a pretty built, 6'2" dude, and I was around 26 years old at the time. I was on a road trip with a mate, traveling around the central Queensland outback in my old, semi-reliable Nissan X-Trail. We're both science and zoology nerds, and had heard about this amazing dinosaur trail out this way, which is basically a grouping of 3 areas: Winton, Richmond, and Hewenden. That have had previous dino bone discoveries still have fossils as well as seriously awesome dinosaur tracks with preserved foot imprints. We were staying at a place 3 hours from Winton for a couple of days, and we're pretty keen to check out this trail. So we made the decision to do the 6-hour round trip in a day. We were pretty ambitious and stupid back then. We left at 9 a.m., and the next morning, our car was packed with lunch, several liters of water, and a trusty GPS, and off we went. It was a long drive, but halfway through my air conditioning decided to cark it. If any of you live or have visited Australia in the summer, you would know that it's brutally hot. So I'm sure you can imagine the 3-hour trip there without air conditioning, with the eventuality of 6 hours in the round trip. It was hell. To make matters worse, my GPS also stopped working as the map software didn't recognize the area we were in. Luckily, I had an old Refidex in my back seat, but it was pretty tough to revert to map reading when we are so used to a computer screen telling you where to go. Especially given we're talking the Australian outback here, complete with dirt tracks for roads and very limited signage, but I digress. Finally, we make it to the trail and kick around there for a couple of hours. Not gonna lie, it was pretty awesome. Then, we decide to make the trip back as it was starting to get later in the afternoon, and when we don't be driving back in the dark. As we were about to leave, this gnarly old guy who appeared to be an employee of the trail company, dressed in a khaki camouflage gear, asked us where we were from, where we were headed. He gave me a stink eye when I was vague with the details, but my mate told him the name of the town we were staying. He took a real liking to my mate, and he laughed, and then he told him about our lengthy journey. Apparently, he had taken the long route and there was a much quicker way to get back that would shave about an hour off our trip. We jumped at the directions he gave us. They were all verbal, which we wrote down. Off we went on our merry way, thinking how lucky we were to have met this old dude who gave us some sweet intel on a shortcut home. But I can't deny there was definitely a creep vibe coming from him. Based on the directions he gave us, we went winding along several roads in an area I had never been in, and eventually settled straight on this narrow dirt road. We were supposed to reach an intersection about a half-mile in there, take a right, and continue to the road until we got into a main highway that would take us back. After an hour and a half of driving on this dirt trail, we still hadn't reached this intersection. I was starting to freak out a bit, thinking we missed the turn, but my mate was completely chilled out and was sure we'd get there eventually. I think he thought I was driving too slowly, but there are kangaroos out there, man, and those things are seriously dangerous if you hit one. We had been traveling for a while now. It was getting later and later in the day, and it got to the point where the petrol in the tank was only a quarter full. There were no houses, other roads or cars in sight, and I was really not comfortable with where this was headed. The middle of nowhere, in a remote area in the wasteland that is the Australian outback. There weren't even any trees, only this dirt road and desolate, dry bushland and shrubs as far as the eye can see. I stopped the car and tell my mate to get the binoculars out, and to go to the back and look around in case he could see some landmarks. Yes, I carry binoculars in my car and still do. He obliges, and can make just out a house like a structure down in the far distance. So we made the decision to head for that. We figured it could be a house and maybe people would be nice enough to give us some petrol to top us off. As we neared the structure, it became apparent that it was not a house at all. We pulled up out front to see that it was an old caravan that has been burned to a shell from the outside in. It's still got 3 black and partial walls up though, so we can't see all the way in. And it looks like someone's been there recently because there are animal bones strung up all over the place and a cow skull at the entrance of the caravan. Some of the animal bone things even have grass or horsehair woven into them, and they were arranged like decorations. Then, we see this hand-painted sign that's been staked into the ground with the words, Moonlight Motel on it. My alarm bells are ringing loud and clear. I nudge my friend and say, let's get the fuck out of here. But he's distracted by something in the distance. It's a car, coming in the direction we had just come from. It would have only been 10 minutes behind us the entire time we were driving, but I never saw it, not even once. It was kicking up a ton of dust, which indicates that it was coming towards us fast. It is at this point that we both hear this crispy scratching sound coming from the burned caravan, like someone is scratching at the wall from the inside. I move a little closer and try to see what it was, and there's a person in there, peeking out at us from a hole in the damaged wall. Then, this childlike voice that is obviously a grown man imitating a little girl giggles and says, "Are you here to play with me?" My mate and I both look at each other and book it out of there. Back to the inner sanctum of the X-Trail. Just as I am about to reverse out, the other car stops just behind my car, with the high beams on. I can't see the driver, but they're in my way, so I can't reverse out of this. I have no choice but to drive forward and around the narrowly, small little path that goes right by the motel. As we were turning to leave, the driver starts blaring the horn, just hammering on it for no reason at all. I just sped off, back in the direction we came, and the other car doesn't follow. It's getting to twilight at the States, and pretty dangerous to be out on these country roads once it's dark because of the kangaroo situation. But we're feeling a bit better as we managed to navigate our way back to where we had come from, the Dino Trail, and even start a joke around what happened. The person in the other car was probably just honking at us to get our attention to help with directions or something. I pull into a parking lot and go to the front desk of the company that runs the tours. I explain that we had gotten lost on our way back to town and we were staying at, and the lady there is kind enough to give us enough petrol for the ride back. I couldn't help myself and mentioned to her that her workmate is a real jerk for giving us those weird directions. We figured that there was no way that he would mess up advice like that. And she gives me a weird look and asks me to describe the guy. I do and her face goes funny. She says, "That man does not work here. I saw him talking with tourists today. My boss had to ask him to leave. He kept trying to get details of where people were staying and telling them that he had vacancies at his place and they could stay there, the Moonlight Motel." When I was younger, I lived in a quite small town in Queensland. The whole town was surrounded by bush in every direction for hundreds of kilometers, and we had so much room to play. This particular story is about the first time we got drunk. In the winter, the level of water would drop significantly, enough for us to camp in the riverbed. My best mate's parents owned a pub at the time, so we were in charge of getting the drinks for a little camping trip we had planned, so we could finally pop our drunk cherry. The place we had in mind was out near an old indigenous settlement where a few creepy things have happened to us over time. So, we made our way down into the riverbank, which was a low on the side that we came in and really high on the other side. You couldn't see the other side through all the trees on the top, and it was kind of unnerving knowing someone could be up there watching you and you wouldn't know. There are about 7 of us kids in the camp, and our parents have no idea where we are or what we are doing. We lied and said we were staying at a friend's place. We set up our camp and built a little shelter for all of us to sleep under. We were all set up and start drinking as the sun is setting. Soon, it's dark and we are full of swing mixing drinks and singing songs and throwing stuff into the water, and generally making a whole heap of noise. As we are starting to wind down, One of my friends says how something moved at the top of the riverbank on the steep side. We all say that he is full of shit and should calm down, but he is adamant that there's someone up there. So we all start calling out, "Come out, you pussy," and other such things, being brave well beyond our years. To our surprise, a bearded man wearing straggly clothes and no shoes comes out to the tree line. He stands on the edge of the bank and just stares at us. We all go silent, waiting for him to do something for about 5 minutes. He just stands there. Then he retreats back into the tree line. We all talk amongst ourselves and get a bit nervous, but we soon forget about it. About an hour later, the guy is back, but he isn't on the bank anymore. He is coming out of the shadows from the other side of the bank and entering our camp. He stands next to our fire and just joins our group of 12-year-old kids and stands there. We are officially a bit scared and don't really know what to do, so we just sit there in silence. Eventually, one of my friends gets the courage to speak to him. "Good-eye, mate. How are you? Are you okay?" The guy just stares at my friend and then starts staring at each other, and he turns away for a little bit of time. My friend tries again. "Hey, are you okay? What's your name?" The man snaps his head back at my friend and stares at him wide-eyed for at least 2 minutes before answering. Without blinking, he says in a raspy whisper, "That's none of your fucking business." And he hisses like a cat. Then, this guy jumps back, screaming and staring at the fire, like it just appeared, and runs off up the steep bank in record time. It was impossible to get up this thing, so we all stand there speechless. We decide that it's best if we just stoke the fire up because it's a 19-kilometer walk back to town, and we definitely weren't doing that at night. So we stoked the fire. We sat it for as long as we could, keeping watch, not really talking. We eventually dozed off one at a time. When we woke up in the morning, everything was gone. All of our alcohol, all of our bags, all of our shoes, all of our blankets, everything. The creepy thing is none of us awoke as someone robbed us blind, and there was not a single footprint. We were sleeping in a wettish sand, so there was no way that there couldn't have been footprints. It looked like we hadn't even been there. Needless to say, we bailed out and ran almost all the way back to town. Our feet were cut up and messed up by the time we got back. We never told our parents about that camping trip, and I don't think we ever will. This happened about 3 years ago in Western Maryland. It was late September, and 3 of my friends and I were at a camping trip at a state park outside of Cumberland. We got there pretty early in the afternoon and set up camp because we wanted to hike around a bit before it got dark. Anyway, after we got back to camp and the sun had gone down, we gathered some wood for a fire. We were in the process of building the fire when we noticed a light suddenly appeared at the top of the hill by our campsite. We were down in a small valley with steep hills all around us, and it was very dark because it was heavily forested. We all kind of ignored it, thinking it was either the moon coming up or maybe there was a building that we hadn't noticed before. As time went on, I became curious about the light. Like, I needed to go up there and see what it was. My friends didn't share my curiosity and had no desire to check it out. They just kept telling me it was the moon coming up and I was being stupid. To me, the light didn't appear like anything moon might, and it wasn't really like a moon, so it was starting to creep me out. I took off up the hill and put my mind at ease. The hill was densely forested and full of briars. It was totally dark except for the light up ahead, so I had to proceed carefully. I was almost to the light when I heard something moving up ahead. I stopped so I could hear it better, assuming it was a deer or some other woodland creature. However, it didn't sound like a deer. It sounded like something, maybe a person sneaking in the woods, moving slowly so as not to make much noise. Then I heard another sound coming from the other side of me. I froze, trying to get an idea of what was approaching me. Footsteps got closer, and I just stood there waiting for whatever it was to find me. Then I saw it. It was the classic gray alien, about 5'5", and the light from ahead was reflecting off of its skin. That is the only thing I remember about it. I didn't get a very good look at it. I was just kind of scared, and I think I lost consciousness. The next thing I remember, I was picking myself up off the ground. It didn't seem like any time had passed, but there was a definite lapse of consciousness, like I was taken out and reinserted into time. I decided to go back to the campsite. I could see the light from a fire my friends had made. But on my way back to camp, I start hearing voices. Inside my head, I have no history of schizophrenia and consider myself a very calm and controlled person. I have never had anything like this happen to me before or since. The voices were very subtle, but they were definitely there. At first I was kind of ecstatic, but I was actually communicating with what I thought were aliens. This is the most amazing thing to have ever happened to me. They tell me I am special, and they chose me to make contact because I was open-minded. However, they soon start mocking me, and their tone gets very ugly, and they begin to sound almost demonic. They tell me I'm going to burn in hell and to kill myself. They tell me to throw myself into the campfire and get it over with. I am terrified at this point, and I can't get the voices to stop. I get back to the campsite, and my friends are enjoying themselves like nothing had ever happened. They talk to me, but their voices sound different. They sound like their voices were the ones that I heard in my head. And all I can understand is that they hate me and want me to die. I pretty much have a panic attack and lay down on the ground crying. The voices in my head continue to torment me, and just keeps getting worse. Finally, my friend starts holding me and telling me everything is fine. We are both atheists, or at least agnostic. But for some reason she tells me to pray for Jesus. I start praying out loud and asking Jesus to help me. I do this for quite a while, and the voices finally die down and go away. I go to lay down and try to sleep to forget about what just happened, and I see the moon coming up over the hill. One of my best buddies from college was a geologist major that ended up becoming a ranger in the Southeast United States. We haven't spoken in years, as is the case with age, but I remember about 8 to 9 years back he was telling me about an old married couple that he had recently helped out. He had seen them come to the park several days in a row, and found out they were visiting from out west, and they had gotten engaged there decades prior. They had been searching for a spot they'd taken pictures of when they popped the question about having trouble. After looking at the pics and figuring out roughly where they were trying to get to, he escorted them in his vehicle, then hiked them to where he thought that it would be. They found it and he left them there and went back to a station at the entrance. He said he got a weird feeling once he got back and felt like he needed to wait to see them whenever they left. Well, once it came time to lock up at night, he still hadn't seen them leave, so he reported it. He left his assistant to wait at the shack at the entrance and wait for them where he left them. He went back to try to find them. He found them both there laying down, spooning along the brink of the river. Neither were alive. He called the cops, went through the 9 yards, and went home. The police were able to disclose them to their identities, but weren't sure of anything else initially. Later he learned that the wife was terminally ill with cancer, and they both committed suicide by ingesting some sort of chemical pill combination. They just chose to do it where they had gotten engaged at. My bud wasn't torn up about it. He was obviously sad for them dying, but said he thought that they wouldn't have asked for help earlier because they didn't want anyone to think that they helped kill them. In the 90s, before everyone had cell phones, my Girl Scout troop was camping in a state park when a terrible thunderstorm came through the area. with major flood warnings. The rangers at the park frantically came through every campsite and evacuated everyone to higher ground. Everyone, that is, except for us and the Boy Scouts in the site next to us. We went to bed with light rain, but woke up in the middle of the night to our tents collapsing from the driving rain and the water quickly rising. The Boy Scouts, they were 12 to 16 years old. We were 7 to 9 years old, and ours helped us quickly pack our sites into our cars. Unfortunately, the roads were too dangerous to drive on because we couldn't see how deep the water was, and we didn't know if any sections of the road had been washed out. We abandoned all the vehicles that used the map that scout leaders had to find some place that wouldn't be flooded. A few miles away, there were treehouse cabins that were built around a tree and lofted 15 feet in the air. It was decided that we needed to move quickly, and that was our best shot. The older boys and the adults carried the smallest girls when it became clear that the wind was preventing them from staying on their feet. The wind and rain soaked everyone through the skin. We made it to the cabins, and the adults broke in and raided the emergency supplies there for space blankets. There was no way to build a fire because there was no firewood. It had been an especially dry year, and starting campfires was forbidden due to the risk of starting a forest fire. I remember shivering for hours. All of us girls in the middle of a huddle on the floor with the Boy Scouts on the outside trying their best to keep us warm. One of the boys asked if we knew any Girl Scout songs, either camp sounds or more of a Girl Scout thing than a Boy Scout thing, or they were just humoring us. We sang every song we knew, and the leaders taught us a few more that they had learned. At some point, we were convincing the boys to sing in rounds with us. Morning came and the rain slowed down to a light drizzle, and a ranger showed up assessing damage to the park. He discovered us and immediately drove us to get help. They returned with a bunch of trucks and all-terrain vehicles. They drove us to a location where doctors were on site to evaluate us. It was sheer luck that none of us had anything worse than the chills. It could have been worse than it was, and they were unbelievably lucky to have survived it all. We could have easily died in our sleep if the flood had come through all at once instead of slowly rising. If the Boy Scouts hadn't been there, then us small girls would not have been able to hike out of there safely. If we had to try to drive, we would have been washed away. Some buddies and I went camping by the lake one night. About 1:30 a.m., we heard some rustling in the bushes and just figured it was a rabbit or something. We went over to check it out and found nothing. At about 1:35 a.m., a huge pickup truck that was lifted and blaring loud music drove by on a dirt road. Really, really slowly, shining a huge police-grade spotlight on me and my friends. The truck burned out and kept driving. So, my best friend and I decided to drive up the road to see if we could spot anything unusual about the truck. We get to the main road, and there are probably 7 or 8 cop cars, lights flashing, and 2 or 3 ambulances. We stopped to turn around, I swear, like a damn horror film. A cop pecks on my window with his flashlight out of nowhere. He asked what we're doing, and we told him we were camping and told him about the truck. He says, well, you boys might want to camp somewhere else. We had a homicide here and haven't located the suspect. My friend says, so you think we should all have guns? I said yes, sir, and tore off back down the campsite. My best friend called the rest of our buddies and told them to pack up the gear, not to ask questions, and that we had to get out. We literally threw 2 fully pitched tents in the back of one of our trucks and got the hell out of there. The cops located the killer about 30 minutes later at our campsite. I went out pigging with one of my best mates all the time. But this one time, the dogs lose their shit and go to jump off the back. So we stop and let them loose, and they shoot off like they're on the trail of something beside a really tall dam bank, so we think we're on to some pigs. We were standing there and could hear their bells off in the distance getting further away. Then nothing. The bush was silent, and we started to get a bit unnerved. We felt okay because we both were holding loaded guns, but it was still an uneasy feeling. We stood there listening for about 10 to 15 minutes and could hear not a thing. It was almost suffocating. So, my friend and I started calling the dogs in. He is calling for a good 15 minutes, and we were still hearing nothing. So he says, fuck this, we're going to look for them. As he turns the car on, we hear bells come from behind us in the tree line, which we thought was weird because it was the opposite direction which the dogs had left. So we turned around listening. My mate starts calling out to them to come from behind us, and here comes the dogs, without their bells on. Needless to say, we were both shitting bricks and threw them in the car and bailed out. The whole time, the bells were just jingling like something had them on. Weird thing is that we were a good 400 kilometers from the closest civilization. So we shit bricks and were uneasy for the rest of the night. Has anyone experienced anything like this? What in the hell could have possibly taken off our dog's collars?